Alrighty, first things first, when you get your calculator, the first thing you need to make sure that you do is make sure it's in the right mode. We can measure angles in degrees, which is what we're used to, and radians, which is what we are not used to. So you press mode. I can see that mine actually has radians being highlighted. So I'm going to scroll down, scroll over, press enter. It has now changed to degree because degree is highlighted. Press second, quit, and we are good to go. So make sure you do that. Now if I'm talking here, I'm looking for side length W. It gives me 20 degrees, so that's what I'll be using for my trigonometric ratio and setting everything up. And whenever I have a picture like this, the first thing I always do is label where my hypotenuse is. Your hypotenuse will always be across from the right angle. So my hypotenuse length is 24. So hypotenuse. Then, in relation to this 20 degrees, if I have to go across to get to W, that makes it the opposite side. If I was dealing with the side length right beside the angle, or the side that helps make up the angle, that would be adjacent. We don't have anything written there, so I won't be dealing with adjacent. I will be dealing with opposite, which is what I'm trying to solve for, and my hypotenuse, which they tell me is 24. Then from there, I need to figure out how or which trigonometric function to use. We can know by remembering the little saying or little phrase, SOHCAHTOA. I write SOHCAHTOA like this. You could write it all out linear, just straight across, horizontally. But I like to have it vertically set up here so I remember, okay, opposite is over hypotenuse. Adjacent is over hypotenuse. Opposite is over adjacent. And again, the S is for sine, and that's the relationship. Cosine, that's the relationship. And tangent, where this is the relationship. So if I'm dealing with opposite and hypotenuse, I know that that is going to be opposite and hypotenuse, which is sine. So I know that sine of 20 degrees is equal to the opposite, which is W, over the hypotenuse, which is 24. From there, I need to cross multiply. In order to cross multiply, let me grab a couple colors. I need to put my sine of 20 over 1 because any number over 1 is just itself. Quick example, 9 divided by 1 is 9. So sine of 20 over 1 is still just sine of 20, so we didn't change anything. From there we will cross multiply. And we know that W times 1 is W, and 24 times sine of 20 is 24 times sine of 20 degrees. From there, we're going to pick up our calculator because if we have our variable is equal to numbers, there's no variable on this side, I can go ahead and plug that into my calculator. And I can say W is equal to 24 times sine of 20. Oops. And we get 8.208483444. It tells me to round to the nearest hundredth. Remember, the hundredth place is the second place after the decimal. So that means I would be rounding here at the 0 because this is the 10th place, this is the 100th place. So I'm going to look at the number on the right. Because it is above 5 or greater, we are going to round up. So instead of it being 8.20, this 8 is large enough to make this 0 actually a 1. So our final answer will be 8.21. We were not given units here, so you can just say 8.21 is your answer. Now let's look at B. For B, we are shown this angle right here. And again, I'm always going to start with my hypotenuse. Across from my right angle is my hypotenuse. And then, in terms of, or in relation to this 32 degrees, this x is right beside it. So that makes x our adjacent side. So now, if I'm dealing with adjacent and hypotenuse, I always label everything because once everything's labeled, you can just go ahead and plug things in here. So if I'm dealing with adjacent and hypotenuse is cosine, because that's got a big C in front of it. That C stands for cosine. So cosine of 32 degrees equals adjacent over hypotenuse, where the adjacent is x, the hypotenuse is 17. So we're going to do the same thing here. We're going to put cosine of 32 degrees over 1, and we will cross multiply. When we cross multiply, we get x times 1, which is x, and that's equal to 17 times cosine of 32 degrees. 17 times cosine 32 degrees. If we're solving for this variable, and this variable says this equals such and such, and we have no variables on this side, we can go ahead and just plug it into our calculator. And we can say 17 times cosine 32 gives me 14.4168173 or 63. If we're running to the second place is where this 1 is. We're going to look to the right. 6 is greater than 5, so that means it's going to bump this 1 up to a 2. So our answer will be 14.42. If this 6 was a 5, it would also bump. If this 6 was a 4, then this would stay as a 1. We don't ever bump it down anything. It'll either stay the same or go up. If it's 5 or greater, it goes up. If it's 0 to 4, it'll just stay the same. So x equals 14.42. Again, we were not given units, so that will be your final answer. You could write units on the side if you wanted to. Now, for C. If I'm dealing with C, this across from the right angle is my hypotenuse. But do you see how nothing is written for the hypotenuse? We don't need to add any variables because we already have a variable written. So we're going to be using the only trigonometric function that does not incorporate the hypotenuse, which is going to be our tangent function. Sine uses the hypotenuse, cosine uses the hypotenuse, tangent does not. So in terms of this 50 degrees, right beside it will be our adjacent side. Adjacent means beside, touching. And then if we're dealing with this 50 degrees and we have to go across, if we go across, that makes it opposite. So, give me 1 second. All right, so now that I have everything labeled, I know I'll be using tangent, again, because it's the only one that doesn't use hypotenuse. We had nothing written for our hypotenuse. So I know that tangent of 50 degrees equals opposite over adjacent. So opposite is 20, adjacent is our variable y. We're going to need to cross multiply again, so we'll put tangent of 50 over over 1. This one is going to be, let me pull you over a little bit. There we go. A little bit different than before. When we cross multiply, 20 times 1 is 20, so 20 equals, and y times tangent of 50 is y times tangent of 50 degrees. The opposite operation to multiplication is going to be division. So in order to get y by itself, because that's what we're trying to solve for, we want y to be equal to something, we're going to need to divide both sides of our equation by tangent of 50. So divide everything here by tangent of 50 degrees, divide everything here by tangent of 50 degrees. Tangent over tangent just becomes a 1. They cancel each other out. So y equals 20 over tangent of 50 degrees. Keeping in mind that tangent of 50 is 1 unit. Whenever I press tangent, a little parenthesis pops up because it's saying tangent of what? That's all one piece. So 20 divided by tangent of 50 gives me 16.78. So we'll be rounding this 8. If we look to the right, it's a 1. So that means we will not bump it up. It will stay the same. And so y equals 16.78.